Good morning from the Just Build Baby studio. We have Kevin Grady here from Grady Consulting. Everything we're going to talk about is accurate as of April 15th, 2025. So good morning, Kevin.
Good morning, Buzz. Thanks for having me.
So if you would just take a minute and introduce yourself, what your company is, etc.
Sure. Kevin Grady, Grady Consulting. We are civil engineers and land surveyors. We started our business in 1998. My brother Rick and I left our old company, started a new company. My brother Darren joined a few years later. Basically, we do permitting for all construction projects. Anything from your backyard septic system to an addition, a deck. Currently, I'm working on a project for the National Women's Soccer League, their training facility, and we do everything in between. We also have a survey department that includes all the latest technology. We have multiple survey tools, including total stations, robotics, scan stations, drone equipment, and all the equipment to post-process it. So we've been doing this a long time. We work with a lot of regulations, Title V, zoning, planning board, detail regulations about how to construct roadways, you name it. So we've been at it for a while.
Okay, awesome. So it's you and your two brothers, and you're located in Kingston, Mass.
Correct.
And you've been there since
1998.
Wow.
And we have, in the mid-20s for employees right now. It's been some moving parts lately, so.
Yeah, understood. So I invited Kevin in. We're going to talk about everything septic system regarding ADUs. So obviously, that's a hot topic. ADUs became, statewide legal in February of 2025. I think the regulations from the state got ahead of a lot of other regulations. And the DEP on April 7th put out what they call a guidance. It's not rules, it's
Correct.
Guidance.
Yep.
On April 7th, 2025. And they call it, the document serves as the MassDEP Title V program guidance on the application of 310 CMR 1500, which is also known as Title V. And again, on August 6, 2024, Governor Healy signed the Affordable Homes Act, and part of that act included the rights to build an accessory dwelling unit on your property under all those regulations. And we're not going to go into those regulations today. We're going to focus on all things septic. For those of you who don't know what an ADU is, an accessory dwelling unit is a self-contained housing unit inclusive of sleeping, cooking, and sanitary facilities on the same lot as the principal dwelling, subject to dimensional and parking requirements. Again, boil that down. If you have a single-family home in Massachusetts, you can build up to 50% of the gross floor area, up to 900 square feet. And that's as of right, subject to a whole bunch of little nuances. And one of those is Title V, which we're going to talk about today. So before we jump into that, Kevin, is there anything that you've discovered after you read this guidance that you want to talk about specifically?
Nothing jumps out to me because I work with these regulations all the time. I think one of the things that a homeowner might need to know on a macro level is if your system is functioning and it meets the current regulations of Title V, that's the best scenario for you because we can do things with that. We can expand it if you're adding flow, and we can connect the ADU to it if that's the case. If it's non-conforming or non-functioning, that's the worst scenario.
Understood.
You basically have to start over.
Yep. And so we're going to dig into that. So they've given us some what-if scenarios here, and we're just going to go down the list. Okay, so part of that Title V provisions are relevant to the creation of ADUs, and it defines a dwelling as a building used or intended to design for human habitation, which an ADU is. Facility is a part of a real property. This is an interesting word, facility. Includes any real abutting real property, and any buildings thereon. So when Title V, when they refer to a facility, they're speaking about the land and the buildings on it.
Yes, so the land you control, and if you have multiple buildings and multiple septic systems on that parcel, that is the facility.
Okay, so it can be, if they're in continuous ownership, you could have 3 lots in continuous ownership with 3 different septics, and that would be considered all one facility? Or would it just be the lot, the one bounded lot?
The one bounded lot.
Okay. So that was even though I, once upon a time, was a Title V inspector licensed a million years ago, I had forgotten that term, so that was an interesting term to refresh on. They define new construction. This is key, obviously. New construction, the construction of a new building for an occupancy permit is required on the increase in the actual design flow to any system. So that's going to come up later. And defines an on-site septic system, disposal system, or on-site subsurface sewage disposal system. And it also goes on to talk about what a non-conforming system is.
I actually highlighted this.
Okay.
That non-conforming system
All right, go
is
ahead.
going to be key. Non-conforming systems basically says systems which are not in full compliance with the standards and requirements of Title V and for which a variance or local upgrade approval has not been obtained. Non-conforming systems include cesspools, privies, failed systems, and systems with a design flow of over 10,000 gallons per day. It's actually at a seminar with Massachusetts Environmental Health Association where they went over some of this. So if your septic system is non-conforming, if it was designed before the change to Title V in 1995, the DEP considers that a non-conforming system. So I think that's where a lot of problems are going to arise in the local towns and how they're going to handle that. For example, Kingston has always oversized their septic systems, and they probably comply with Title V, even if they were designed before 1995. So there's going to be subject to interpretation and how each town handles that. At the back of this, it does talk about variance allowances, and I think that's how towns are going to have to manage that nuance of older design systems. Because if you have a functioning system, it's not a hazard to the environment, and you want to, improve your property, the town should be there to help you, not to, as long as it's environmentally safe, they shouldn't be making you replace that. So then you apply for a variance, you write them a letter, and you tell them why they should be granting this.
Okay.
So that's where the leeway is going to be in a lot of these scenarios.
Yeah, and again, that's going to be town by town.
Correct.
Right.
Board by board.
Board by board, town by town.
Yep.
Right? So, and it also goes on to define what an upgrade is, which basically modification of one or more components of an on-site septic system. So those are your definitions, if you will, relative to ADU. So then it goes on to say, based on the foregoing, the addition of an ADU to an existing facility meets the definition of new construction. Now, my question is, you are allowed to do an ADU inside a house, attached to a house, or detached under state law, right?
Yep.
So my question is, if you have an existing house, you don't expand the footprint, you carve out a section of the house to make an ADU, is that now new construction?
I wouldn't think so. It's the way we would look at it is there an increase in flow? And an increase in flow is, have you increased the total number of bedrooms? Because the flow for a residential dwelling, no matter what it is always from the number of bedrooms.
Right. It's at 110 gallons per day, correct?
Yes, and we get into the definition of bedroom on almost every septic system we design. Total number of rooms greater than 8 divided by 2, rounded down to the next whole number. So if you add a couple of living rooms that aren't bedrooms and you get it over 8 total rooms, now we have to do some math on it, and we have to...
Wait, go back to that math again.
Yep.
Walk through that a little slower.
Sure.
That's a good point.
The definition of bedrooms under Title V is 2 different things. It's a direct count of the number of bedrooms.
Okay.
Or it's the total number of rooms in the house greater than 8. So if you're under 8, they're not gonna, you don't do this math.
Okay. So if you have more than 8 rooms,
Yep.
you now have to apply this formula.
Yep. Total number of rooms greater than 8 divided by 2.
So if we have 10 rooms in our house, and we now have to divide by 2,
Yep.
equals 5. Then what?
So if you have 9, you're at 4.5. You round down to the next whole number. So
Okay.
at 10 total rooms, you're a 5-bedroom system. At 9 total rooms, you're a 4-bedroom system.
Got it.
Now that doesn't include bathrooms, hallways, closets, storage areas, garages, utility rooms.
Okay. So if I have a house with a living room, a family room, a heated finished sunroom, and then 3 or 4 bedrooms, I'm probably looking at a 5 or 6 bedroom system.
You could, well, I didn't do
Kitchen.
the count on that. Okay, so it sounded probably like 9 to me.
Yeah.
So I think you're at 4
Okay.
there. We do get into discussions with the various boards of health on these open floor plans. There's a lot of open floor plans.
Sure.
Right, where you have a kitchen that's connected to your living room, and
Right.
it's also connected to a dining room. It's an L shape, but it's wide open. How many rooms is that?
It's 1.
Yeah, it is. We've argued that, and for the most part, the boards of health are reasonable when it comes to that conversation, most of them.
Right.
Because then we're leaning on how many bedrooms are actually there, how many people are living there. Because you don't want to undersize your system for design, and you don't want to oversize it. There's a
All right, so
right
why?
spot.
Why don't you want to oversize it?
You can, and we typically do by a small
little bit,
percentage,
sure.
right, to account for it. But do you want to bury your money under the ground?
Okay, so it's a monetary thing. The
Yeah.
system will still function.
Absolutely.
So just a little sidebar here. So we're building a new construction house. We want to future-proof it for a 2-bedroom ADU. The Board of Health says this is a 4-bedroom house. Can we now put in a 6-bedroom septic system with the proviso that, hey, we're going to hook up to this someday?
It's an interesting question. Yes. So when you fill out the application, it asks you what the design flow is. So you have
Right.
to be careful to make sure you fill that out correctly, so that in the future
Right.
you, when you're going
Yeah,
back,
yeah.
it says 660. If you actually put 440 there or something,
Correct.
you probably have to have a conversation to correct that. But sometimes there's new rules out there,
Sure.
and new interpretations and new people in departments,
Yeah.
and so it gets nuanced, and you have to communicate how are we managing that.
100%. But you could, if you knew or anticipated that you were going to need a couple extra bedrooms down the road, you could put in a 6-bedroom system now with a 2-compartment tank, which we're going to talk about,
Sure.
right? And then at that point, assuming you planned correctly, you would just hook into that tank and you'd be up and running.
And if you really think you're going to be doing it in the next 5 years, anywhere in that range, you probably should, because you don't want to rip your yard apart to expand the system. You are already mobilized. You've got the stuff.
So
there.
the way to future-proof is to build the system to accept the current design flow. Again, everything we're saying is April of 2025, right? The current design flow at 110 gallons a bedroom, so it's a 6-bedroom. Say you have a 4-bedroom house, 2-bedroom ADU. So we want to design that system at 660. Now, would you also put a safety factor on that in your design? Do you typically put 10% on? Or?
So what we'll do is we'll do the math for the required square footage of the system based on the perk test rate, and we round up to even numbers.
Okay.
So if we're at 47.5 feet, we're just going to go to 50.
Got it.
You're buying a length of pipe.
Understood.
Ultimately, it's going to be up to the Board of Health and the health agent. I can tell them that I'm an expert at this. I've been doing it this long, and this is my interpretation of it. And if it's straightforward, it's done. But if we get into one of these odd areas, then we might have to go to the variance scenario.
Right.
Yeah.
So the first one is an ADU is proposed to discharge into an existing septic system serving a facility, which is one or more structures on a lot, was constructed in full compliance with Title V, and there will be an increase in the facility's design flow, increase in number of bedrooms, the facility. And so it goes on to say now, the existing septic system must meet new construction standard, be in full compliance with Title V. for the total number of bedrooms of the facility. This is because 310 CMR 15.20 requires that any upgrade, modification, one or more components of a septic system to accept increased design flow be performed in full compliance with requirements applicable to new construction. So then it goes on to say, and this is something I think I had heard before, but I had forgotten about. So multi-compartment tank. So what does that mean? What is a multi-compartment tank?
So multi-compartment tanks are required for all non-residential systems, and the only scenario that allows a single compartment tank is a single family dwelling.
Got it.
If you add an ADU, you now have 2 single family dwellings. The 2 compartment septic tank or 2 tanks in series, you're allowed to do it either way. The first.
Well, let me stop you there though. So, what's different besides a standard 1,500 gallon tanks, single tank, versus a dual compartment? What's inside that's different?
So the first compartment settles the solids. Anything that's heavy will fall to the bottom, and then you have the effluent liquid go through to the next compartment. Sometimes there's carryover, so you get another settling tank.
Okay, so it's essentially a bigger tank, so they're typically, 2,000 gallons?
Correct.
So 2,000 gallons, and it's essentially, has a chamber inside of it with a hole and some mechanism for the water to flow from one to the other in a controlled fashion with some sanitary teas, I'm assuming?
Correct.
And so the water raises up, drips over and goes into the next chamber and leaves the solids behind. And then any solids that didn't get left behind then settle in the second tank, and then it goes out to the leaching field from there.
Correct.
The whole purpose is to try to remove as much solids as possible.
Correct.
Okay.
Because the solids they'll block up the system.
Got it.
Grease in particular, you're trying to capture that.
Yeah.
The other scenario is you can do 2 tanks in series. 1,500 gallon tank is the minimum under Title V. That second compartment tank, depending upon what your flow is, could be 1,000 gallon. Those are off the shelf. They're made all the time, so they're not overly expensive and they're available.
So it's a commodity.
Yeah.
So let's talk through that. So I'm assuming that more of these yards are going to start having 2,000 gallon dual compartment tanks in stock because they're going to sell a lot more of them.
Yep.
Right. But in that first scenario, though, let's talk about. So if it was an existing system, I'm just going to house A, right, and it had a Title V compliant septic system, 3 bedrooms.
Yep.
And we want to add a 1-bedroom ADU on. The leaching field was designed so that it's only 360 gallons a day, so it's short of the 440 that we need for the 4 bedrooms. There's a 1,500 gallon tank. What you're saying is we can leave that tank and then add another 1,500 gallon tank, or can we do a 1,000 gallon?
Do a 1,000. It's because the first chamber of the 2 compartment tank or the tanks in series has to be 2 times the design flow.
Got it.
And the second chamber can be 1 times the design flow.
Okay. So we could do a 1,000, so a 1,500 and 1,000. So the 1,500 could stay. We would dig up the line, cut in a 1,000, and then assuming we could expand the leaching field, that would be the extent of the work required for that house.
Correct. That's
Okay.
what I would recommend. We've done it already.
Right.
The working septic system's already in the ground. We want to save as much of that as possible, save the homeowner money.
Right.
And not
So
bury
that-
that cash in the ground.
Yeah. So that's the least the least expensive option is you have a oversized system, as you stated. I'm just going to talk about the town of Kingston. So Kingston's always had a minimum leaching area, correct?
Correct.
And that made, depending on the perk rate, made it be able to accept more bedroom count typically than just, it wasn't sized by the bedroom count, it was sized by that minimum
Square
leaching
footage.
area of the square footage of the leaching area, which thereby increased the maximum flow it could accept.
Correct.
Right.
And back in the day, sometimes you have, when we're designing these, sometimes it's maybe an older person who doesn't have a lot of money, and we don't really want to build them extra size leaching field. And you look at Title V and it could be smaller, but Kingston decided a long time ago to make it 800 square feet minimum, which is oversized. And we've been putting them in, and now with this new law, the purpose was so they could expand houses and allow for development. And
Sure.
with this new law, it's really coming to fruition that it's probably a good idea after all.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, no, it's money well spent. So
Yeah.
in that scenario, right, so Kingston, Mass, we have a existing Title V system. It was built in whatever the last 20 years.
Yep.
We have a 1,500-gallon tank. We want to do a detached ADU or an attached ADU. In that scenario, all we would need to do is cut in a 1,000-gallon tank,
Correct.
and we're up and running.
Yep.
Okay, so that's best case scenario.
Yes.
Okay, so that's good stuff.
Yeah.
All right. Now it goes on. So in short of that is if we have an existing Title V approved, making a multi-compartment tank is as simple as adding a 1,000-gallon tank.
Correct.
If everything else checks out. Okay. Let's see. If an ADU is proposed to discharge into its own newly constructed septic system, so we've decided that for whatever reason, grading, distance,
Yes.
we don't want to pump effluent,
Site constraints.
topography,
Yep.
water table, whatever that is. We've decided that we want to put a newly constructed septic system for the new accessory dwelling unit. Now, a couple things on that. I read in here that we couldn't put in a one-bedroom system on new construction, but can we for an ADU?
Yes, because you already have other bedrooms.
Got it, okay. So if we were just building a house, we couldn't build a one-bedroom septic system, but because we're already on the facility, now we have additional bedrooms, we could literally build a one-bedroom septic system.
Sorry, I misunderstood your question. Because
No, this is tricky stuff.
Because we're separating the two.
Right.
So you would be required to do 2 bedrooms. And it's not going to cost that much more.
It's just a larger leaching field.
Yeah, you need a 1,500-gallon tank anyway.
That was gonna be my question, yeah.
And then the field would be tiny for a one-bedroom system in most scenarios,
Right.
especially in Kingston. The soils are generally pretty good.
Right.
So Title V says 2-bedroom minimum. You mobilized, it's not going to be that much bigger.
Yeah, so it's an additional pit or chamber, depending on what you're using.
Yep.
And a Kel-Tec pit or an LC7, whatever it is, LC6.
Yep.
And then a little bit of more stone.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. So even if you're building a one-bedroom ADU, you're going to do its own septic system, it's going to be sized for 2 bedrooms.
Correct.
So in that scenario, depending on your math and what you're trying to accomplish, it may make sense to make the unit a little bigger, to future-proof it, to say, hey, this office could then be a bedroom down the road for the next person in the ADU.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So that's a good question. So how are we gonna, it's a sidebar here, right? So we talked about bedroom count on a new construction, but in an ADU, they're so small, I guess you're just saying that's the bedroom.
Total number of rooms greater than 8 divided by 2.
Right.
So we're gonna count those as well.
Yeah, so, but again, most of these are,
Yeah,
under
2
900
rooms.
square foot, you have 3 to 4 rooms.
Yeah.
You said the bathroom doesn't count, correct?
Correct.
Right, so you have three rooms, right?
Correct.
So how many bedrooms is that?
Well, it's a direct count of the number of bedrooms.
Okay, so we say that's the bedroom,
Yep.
and this is an office, and
You
this
can
is the
also have
living room.
2-bedroom ADUs
Sure.
as well. So we're still in the direct count of the number of bedrooms part of that definition.
Okay. So even though we call it a one-bedroom, it's not gonna matter from a septic system design standpoint because we're gonna be forced to put a 2-bedroom system in.
You got it.
Okay. All right, that's good information for people to know. Okay. And then it goes on to say if an ADU is proposed to discharge into an existing non-conforming system serving the principal dwelling, and there will be an increase in the facility's approved design flow, which obviously it would be because we're installing a new ADU.
Right.
The existing septic system must meet new construction standards for a total number of bedrooms. A multi-compartment septic tank or 2 tanks in series is required. So essentially, if I have an older house and I have a couple old leaching pits and the system's been in there a long time, it's never been upgraded, can pretty much plan on putting a whole new septic system in.
I agree. You could ask for a variance. I've been thinking about this for my house. I actually have 2 pits working perfectly up on a hill, nowhere near groundwater.
Yeah. So you have the old style pits?
Yes.
Yeah.
They're no longer, so they're
what year was that built?
2000.
Really?
Yeah.
So that wasn't that long ago.
1999.
Okay. So pits was still legal then?
If you permitted them prior to the change of Title V, they were grandfathered for a little while. I didn't research this, but I think that's how they were allowed.
Okay. So
because they're no longer allowed by Title V.
All right, that was my question. Yeah. So if we have a perfectly functioning system, 2 leaching pits, for people who don't know what leaching pit is, it's a 6 to whatever foot diameter pit in the ground, can be anywhere from 3 to 10 feet high with 2 to 4 feet of stone around it. And it's essentially exactly what it sounds like, a pit. The water effluent goes in and then fills up and then disperses in the soil, versus a leaching field, which is spread over a greater area physically.
Yep, so Title V in 1995 was rewritten. They eliminated any systems that had a lot of depth.
Got it.
A couple of things, they're trying to get away from groundwater.
Sure.
So direct discharge of groundwater. The soils is what treats the effluent before it gets into the groundwater, creates a biomat, breaks down the effluent prior to getting discharged or infiltrated into the groundwater. So when you have these deep systems, you're getting closer to the groundwater.
Yeah, and it's less surface area for that disbursement.
Right, and the other thing I believe they were looking at doing is you do have some oxygen up close to the surface, and oxygen is what allows the bacteria to thrive. If you don't have oxygen, it turns anaerobic, and that's really what gums up a lot of systems.
Yeah, so that happened to me once. Someone inadvertently backed over a vent pipe. So for people in the audience, if you have a vent pipe, don't cut it off. Don't plug it up.
Do not.
It's there for a reason, and it's to let some air into the system, some oxygen to feed the microbes.
Yep.
Okay. So in that scenario, for you, let's just pick on you for a minute. So you have 2 pits, and you want to build an ADU. You say, you know what? I'm building an ADU. So in that case, it sounds like, so do you have a 1,500 gallon tank or
I do.
Okay. So in that scenario, that means you're adding another 1,000 gallon tank, and you're abandoning those 2 leaching pits and installing a leaching field.
To be fully compliant with what they said at that MIHA conference that I was talking about.
Right.
And to be compliant with Title V, current Title V regulations.
Right. Now,
I would go ask for a variance.
Yeah, so that was my question. So in the back here, I'm just going to skip ahead to the back, and it does say, let's see, the person requesting the variance has established an enforcement of a provision of the Title V from which this variance is sought would be manifestly unjust. In this case, a new construction, the applicant must demonstrate the enforcement of the provisions from this variance is sought would deprive them of substantially all beneficial use of the property. And it can also demonstrate that an equal level of environmental protection can be achieved without strict application of the provision from which the variance is sought. And it goes on to say the Board of Health may entertain whether, for example, the use of the MassDEP approved effluent T filter installed in 1 compartment tank may be provided an equal level of protection as a 2 compartment tank or 2 tanks in a series for scenarios other than new construction. So they did leave a little wiggle room in here for the Board of Health.
Yes, and I like that. I'm glad they did that because, like I said, in a scenario like mine, where not anywhere near groundwater, the system's functioning perfectly. In order for me to build an ADU so my dad can move closer or my kids can move in, the cost of ripping out that septic system that's functioning and protecting the environment might kill the project.
Correct. Yeah, for everybody listening, the septic system is the wild card of this whole production for ADU.
Yep.
Absolutely is the unknown. It can be the biggest cost variable that is impossible to determine until you dig into until you spend some money doing some research, doing some survey, doing a perk test, and all those things involved that unfortunately you have to spend money to then figure out what that variable is going to cost.
There is a lot of rules, and there's a lot of things you need to check off. It's not on our end, on the engineering side, we do it a lot, so we know it, but there is a lot of steps that go on, and it adds to the cost.
100%. So we can make some best guesses based on systems that have been done recently in that area, looking at data that the Board of Health has available, it's public record, saying, hey, I saw you did a perk test down here, what were the soils, what were the water elevations, et cetera. But until we go dig in the ground on that property, we're never going to really know.
Right. We researched the Board of Health files for the specific lot. A lot of them now do have information on the houses. So since 1995, there's been sales of houses, so there's inspections.
Sure. Right.
Design requirements have been around since 75. We work on houses that haven't been sold since that time, but that's kind of, people pass on,
Yeah, it's becoming, it's more rare now to find an older system.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. Okay. So, but the variance is 100% is adjudicated by the local Board of Health. So let's play that out. So we go and I'm just going to pick on Kingston.
Sure.
Nothing personal, Kingston. So we go to Kingston and we say in your scenario, hey, I'm Kevin Grady. I'd like to leave my leaching pits. I can show you the water table's 40 feet below this because I'm up on a hill, etc. And I want to leave these leaching pits. They're functioning properly. I'm willing to add another 1,000 gallon tank to get the dual compartment satisfied. I want a variance. And they say, no. What is your recourse to that?
I don't think you have one.
Okay. So there's no adjudicating authority above them to go to the DP and say...
I guess you could file with DEP, but they already wrote all of these things.
Got it.
Ahead of this.
So it says they may, so they're not going to force them to.
So then you have to vote for the right people.
Well, that's a discussion beyond today.
That's another meeting?
Yeah, that's another.
Okay.
That's another episode. Careful what you ask for, you might get it. All right, so that's that scenario. So now we have an older house, and we know we quote unquote know that it's not going to comply with Title V. In that scenario, we should just assume that start from scratch from day one. We're going to go. So take me through those steps. What do we need to do to get to the point where you say, here, Buzz, this is what's going to be the new septic's going to look like?
So the first two things we do that our company does at the same time most of the times is that we'll survey the property and conduct perk testing. That's going to turn into an existing conditions plan that gives us the basis of design.
All right, so let me stop you there. So a lot of people don't know what a perk test is. So explain what a perk test is.
Sure. Basically, we're trying to determine how porous the soils are. So the perk test is you basically dig a hole in the...
And perk is short for percolation?
Yeah, percolation.
Okay.
So
we're going to go with a backhoe, we're going to dig?
Excavator dig, 10-foot minimum, so what Title V says. And as a soil evaluator, we will look at the soils profile. Typically, there's an A layer, that's your loam layer, a B layer, that's the brown top second layer. And then there's layers of soil under there. It is highly variable in some towns.
Oh, yeah.
It can be very dense, and you can see the excavator and backhoe struggling to pull it out. In that scenario, your perk test is going to be very slow. There's a lot of fines in there. Water will not flow through that very quickly. You get from Kingston south, you run into a lot of sand, and it's pretty regular. We know what we're getting into. You're going to get fast percolation rates. You're going to pour water into that, and it's going to fly right through, and your septic system design is going to be small. So if we have the first situation and we pour the water and it takes a long time to go through, the septic system is going to be a lot larger, so the cost is going to go up.
Got it. And so you're also looking for where the water table is to establish the water table.
Yes, so we run the perk test. If the perk test is less than 2 minutes an inch. That's the sand version that I was just talking about where the water flies through. The bottom of the leaching field has to be 5 feet above the estimated seasonal high groundwater that is also determined by digging that deep hole.
And what do you look for? So sometimes it's obvious, you see water,
Yep.
right? But what else is your indicator when you're digging that hole?
So we're looking for evidence that the water table has been up in the soil profile previously. So if we were to dig in August, you're probably going to see the actual weeping of water down deeper than it would have been today, April.
Got it.
Right?
Especially it's raining out.
Yep. So we're looking for mostly discolorations. They call them models or redoxymorphic features.
So you'll see an actual line in the soil.
Sometimes you do. Usually it's kind of splotchy, and you'll look at one side of the hole and see if it's actually matching in the other side of the hole.
Got it.
But sometimes you'll get a rock and water
Yeah.
will come down and it will discolor from the rock, and you can't really go by that.
So it's a little bit of an art.
Yes, it is.
Unless there's like because I have seen literal straight lines going across.
Oh yes, yeah. Typically that happens in sands where you get the water table just comes up and sits there for a while, and then it'll drop down. I mean, we've done systems. I've done hundreds and hundreds, and we've dug test holes, and we've seen water table. It's down 8 feet, and we look next door, and there's a septic system sticking up like this. And what we'll do is we'll pull the records and see what they found, and try to see if we're missing it or if they missed it, because it does happen.
I understand. Yeah. It's not a perfect science.
You got to pay attention.
Right.
And you want to be conservative. You don't
100%.
want to design a septic system in the water table.
Yeah.
It's going to fail, and it's not a good situation. So
No. First time's fun, second time stinks. Literally.
Right.
Yep. All right. So that's that scenario.
So we were talking about the perk test and what steps we would go through the rest of the way with the design.
Oh yeah.
Survey, existing conditions. We do that on the same day, and then we would do the perk test in the area that the septic system's supposed to go in. And then we will look at it and try and design it as efficiently as possible. We're trying to save our clients money in any way we can, and also meet the regulations.
Sure.
So that's why it's important to have all that information together before you start talking about, how much is it going to cost? How high is it going to be? I don't really know until we gather the information.
Right. So in that scenario, if we have a low water table and we're able to achieve that 5-foot separation, the system can be a gravity system.
And in the ground, underground.
Right.
So there's
All underground.
no elevation
Right.
change.
But when you see mounds, that means that they were too close to the water table and they had to pick it up.
Correct.
Right. In that scenario, they're going to need a pump of some type so the effluent's going to go into the first septic tank and then into the pump chamber. My question is you have to add the pump chamber. Is that going to count as the second chamber, or you still need the 1,000-gallon tank?
You still need the...
So now we're going to have a 1,500-gallon existing tank, or maybe not. Maybe we have to install a new some type of dual compartment tank and a new pump chamber, and then up to an elevated leaching field, which requires bringing in all good sand or whatever the material is and constructing that leaching field.
Correct.
So that can get pricey.
It can, but if you're going to improve your property value and give your relatives a place to stay, septic systems are expensive, but housing is much more expensive.
Understood. So again, now that we've done that though, and let's pretend there's some financial planning and some trust and some wills involved, now the property is transferable and mortgageable because now we have a Title V system.
Correct.
Because as you know, and maybe everybody listening does, that in order to transfer a property in Massachusetts, you have to have a compliant Title V septic system. Again, everything I'm saying is black and white for the most part, right? So, if you're paying cash and there's some other things going on, but at some point you're going to have to bring the system up to snuff, especially if you're wanting to do a big addition, add bedrooms, add a second floor, or add an accessory dwelling unit.
Correct.
So one of the other scenarios I was thinking about, and this came up, and you and I already had this conversation. So I think there's a lot of systems out there that people think are expandable that are going to come back to bite them. And one of those scenarios are raised systems that they ask for variance from the 5 feet to 4 feet to 3 feet. And it was done within the last 10 years, right? It was oversized, based on the design, but we can't use that leaching field because it's too close to the water table because now we're introducing new construction.
Correct.
Correct?
Correct. So
Right.
when we've done a lot of these.
I'm not picking on anybody. You were trying to save your client money because going up higher costs money, right? More dirt, bigger mound, visually, etc.
So here's the scenario is under a repair, if you're not going to add any flow, you can design a maximum feasible compliant septic system, meaning you have to meet the regulations as much as you can. And then there's a section in Title V called local upgrade. The local approving authority can approve a local upgrade. One of them in there is a reduction in the separation of groundwater by 1 foot.
Okay.
We did a lot of these, and so picture yourself as you're selling your house and moving on. So you want to get your septic system in as efficiently and cheaply as possible. We've run into a lot of situations where that 1 foot is the difference between putting in a pump chamber and not putting in a pump chamber. So we're talking about, over the years, anywhere from $4,000 yesterday to $6,000, $7,000 today.
Correct.
And the approving authorities can and have approved that. It was a good idea for that situation. It served that person, but unfortunately, when you want to increase flow, and with this ADU scenario that just came out of the blue, now we're in a situation.
Yep.
And you can't get a variance on that.
Correct. Yeah, I know that firsthand because we just tried to get one in a town unnamed, and we were shot down. And that's how I actually learned about that scenario.
You didn't ask your local engineer?
I did, actually. So again, just to people understand what I'm talking about, so just because you had a Title V approved system for transfer of real estate doesn't mean it's today Title V compliant to add on to that leaching field.
Correct.
Right. And so there's a lot of raised systems out there, most of them I would say, that ask for that variance, that are now going to be too close to the water table to qualify for new construction.
Yes. And that's another scenario that we run into. It's not just the elimination of the pump chamber. So each foot that mound goes in somebody's yard, it gets harder to grade and harder to hide. And the aesthetic value of somebody coming in to buy that house has a component, right? So if we could get that 1 more foot down and blend it into the yard a little bit better, so that it's, somebody doesn't go and look at the house and go, what the heck is that in the backyard? We did that a lot. So there's a lot of those systems around.
So let's talk that through. So 5 years ago, I had a house. We did an upgrade because I remortgaged or sold it to my whatever, and now we want to do an ADU, and we're too close to the water table. Now what?
So you would think you could design the ADU system separately,
okay,
and retain the other one.
All right. So we're gonna leave the mounded system.
Yep.
And we're gonna go put in a 2-bedroom mounded ADU system separate from that system.
Fully compliant.
Fully compliant.
Right.
Can we?
They address that in this, and no, you can't. Both systems have to be fully Title V compliant.
That's where I was going with this.
Yeah.
So at that point, you're ripping out the whole mound and starting over again.
And then you're probably putting the system together somewhere.
Yeah, especially if you're pumping, you might as well just run to the pump and pump up anyways.
Right.
Right.
So that's one of the tough scenarios.
So mounded systems, if you see a mounded system and you want to do an ADU, you got to really think about it.
You have to do your homework, pull the information at the Board of Health,
Right, and
see if they got a local upgrade or if they have the required separation.
Got it. And so the required separation is now 5 feet.
That's if the perk test was 2 minutes an inch or faster.
Okay. So if it's slow draining soils, less than 2 minutes, more than 2 minutes.
Then you have a 4-foot groundwater separation.
So if I got a variance to 3 feet, I'm out of luck.
Correct.
But if I didn't get a variance and I made it to 4 feet and it's 6 minutes an inch soil, I'm good at 4 feet.
Correct.
And I can then expand that leaching field?
Yes, and what we do a lot of times is we utilize the old perk information that we obtained back when we did the soils testing, or another company did the soils testing. As long as it was done after 1995 and it was done by a licensed soil evaluator and it was witnessed by the Board of Health, most Board of Healths are okay with you just using that.
Using the data.
Yep.
Right. And so that's how we were able to use the data down in Plymouth on the one we just did.
Correct.
Right. Now what if we physically run out of room? So explain. So there's something called breakout.
Yep.
Right. So it says we have a mound. We have to keep the slope, a certain slope distance from the leaching field. Otherwise, the water, instead of going down, will run out the side of the soil, and that's called breakout.
Yep.
So what happens if we physically run out of room? Can we put a retaining wall as the breakout with a rubber membrane? Give me some scenarios.
So yeah, we typically would go with the rubber membrane 5 feet off of the system, and then you can drop the slopes 3 to 1 around the sides.
So that allows the slope to be steeper.
Yes. And if you run out of room, then we can do a wall which is vertical. The walls sometimes have zoning implications.
Yep.
And they're expensive.
Yep.
So we don't do a ton of them.
I understand. It's not a preference, but my point is again, you need to be working with a professional that's going to look at all the ways to say, how can I make this work the least expensive way?
Correct.
Right? And then at some point, all the variability comes in and you say, this is going to be our best case scenario. We're going to ask for a variance to go within 5 feet with the retaining wall because we ran out of physical room for the leaching field and we need to go within 5 feet. So we're going to do a wall with a rubber membrane or a vinyl membrane.
Yep.
And that's going to allow us to get that extra area we need for the leaching field.
Yeah, that's actually the engineering component that I went to college for instead of the permitting part. That's where it's, I'll call it fun, but it's nice to, help somebody get what they want to do and be able to solve the puzzle.
Okay. Now, that's all talking about regular septic systems. Now we have what's called nitrogen sensitive areas. We have,
alternative treatment.
Alternative treatment. So does all that still apply to everything we just talked about apply?
Yes. So nitrogen sensitive areas, well, we can hit that next. We could talk about the alternative treatment systems. So there's alternative treatment systems are allowed by DEP. There's various levels of alternative treatment systems. There's general use approval, provisional use approval, remedial use approval. If you're expanding flow, you can only use the general use approvals.
Okay.
Okay.
So it's new construction.
Yes. When you use one of these units, and basically they are, most of them are aerators, and they give you reductions in the requirements, specifically size requirements.
Okay, so the leaching field can be smaller.
Yes. The alternative treatment tank is providing that first level of treatment before the biomat even has to work.
Got it.
So it's providing oxygen in there. There's a lot of bacteria that the ADU is creating that's breaking down the effluent and the solids before it passes out into the tank. In the tank.
So those are the ones you see with fans on them and other things that are running.
Yes.
And those require maintenance, though.
They do.
So you need to be on a maintenance program.
Yep. So there's an annual
Now,
cost.
is there a scenario where you say, we have a mounted system, we've ran out of room, but if we do an alternative system back, new, we can make it fit inside the area we have to work in.
Yes.
So there's a lot of science and a lot of engineering and a lot of experience that needs to go into these designs and say, listen, we ran out of room. I know you want to do 2 bedrooms. We can only get you 1 more bedroom, and the only way we can get you a bedroom is do an alternative system with a specialized design.
Yeah, and it's been changing faster and faster. There's more units to choose from.
So as the technology is increasing, it gives you more options.
Yes, exactly.
Now, obviously, all those systems are more expensive than a regular septic system.
Yes.
And they require annual maintenance, or more than annual, actually, most of them, right?
Right.
And I think
quarterly to start,
in the beginning, right?
Quarterly start, and then annually after it's up and running.
So there is more expense to an alternative system, but if that's all you can do, that's all you can do.
Correct. And there's other alternative systems too. Drip irrigation. You have to pre-treat it with one of these aerating type systems, but then your drip irrigation tubing is only 1/2 an inch tall. That's the height of your entire leaching field, as opposed to a 2-foot profile, which we're
of
used
stone
to.
and pipe.
Yes, yeah, and we've done numerous applications.
So that can keep your mound height down.
Absolutely.
Right.
If you get
So
a real
maybe
mound
not
issue,
even have a mound.
grading issue.
Sure.
The other thing that type of system is allowed to go within 5 feet of your foundation. And if you have a full basement, a standard leaching field needs to be 20 feet away. If you have a slab, a standard leaching field needs to be 10 feet away. So it gains you some room. Caveat to all this, though, is we have to show an area where a compliant Title V system would fit if it had to. So say the technology lost its approval with the state, or who knows what scenario.
Yeah.
They want you to keep that much room available. You can't put any other structures over it.
Got it.
It has to meet setbacks.
So you could run out of real estate.
You could, but I don't have to deal with elevation so much at that point.
So let you
I
spread
just
out.
I just show the areas.
And in using that in that drip scenario, it can be an odd shape then too.
Oh yeah.
Triangle, circle, whatever.
Anything. Yep. It's all bottom area square foot calculation.
Okay. Now let's throw the wild card in. So all these scenarios assumed, we didn't talk about it, assumed we had town water, right? So now we're going to add the well.
Yep. So
and we have to be a certain distance from the well in a Title V system.
Correct.
So let's bring that into this discussion.
So that's the nitrogen sensitive part that you were talking about.
Well, no, let me.
Well, it is.
I agree, but let me just put a scenario and we'll talk about it, right? So we have a 1/2 acre lot, right? We have a 3-bedroom house. We've got a well in the front corner. We've got the septic in the rear. And they're 100 feet apart. And now we want to do a Title V system for new construction. Can we?
That's a lot of math that I'd actually have to write down, because there's a couple of ways to look at this. You meet the setbacks, but if you're on your own well, or you're in a zone 2, a zone of influence for a town well, the maximum amount of flow you can have on a lot is 440 gallons per day per acre. So you just so you just half acred me, threw 3 bedrooms at me, and said we could fit potentially.
Right.
So at a 1/2 acre, I'd have to check that again. So that's 220 gallons per day. You're not going to be able to increase flow. Because you have your own well. But most lots that have their own well are 40,000 square
bigger.
feet. Maybe in Norwell or some of these towns that haven't had town water, but they have old neighborhoods. Some of those, but they're kind of, that's few and far between. Lakeville, I know around some of the lakes they didn't have water up there.
Correct. We're working on one now that's within 400 feet of the lake.
Right. So that's the nitrogen sensitive part that we started to talk about. 440 gallons per day per acre, and an acre under Title V is 40,000 square feet.
Interesting.
Yeah. So you have to have a full acre to have 4 bedrooms. So if you only have 3 bedrooms, you want to do a 1-bedroom ADU, you can. If you're at 4 bedrooms in your house, then you can't. However, it does talk about this in here too.
Correct.
You could reconfigure
Your
the existing house to reduce the number of bedrooms.
Right.
And I just had a project last week where I talked about that scenario. Technically.
Yeah, so you could do it. You could do a deed restriction on the existing house, take it from 3 bedrooms to 2 bedrooms, do some internal modifications to prove that it's now a 2-bedroom house.
Yep.
And then you could take that 1 bedroom and put it in the ADU, but you still have to make the new system Title V compliant.
Correct.
You don't get a pass on that.
Never. And it makes sense. It's environmental protection.
Right.
So
to sum all that up, the first phone call when you're thinking about an ADU is to say, hey, Mr. Grady, Mr. Kevin Grady, here's my lot, here's what I want to do. Well, maybe the first phone call is to BuildX.
I would do that. Build, baby.
That's it, just build, baby. So you call BuildX, we do a very preliminary site look, and we pull as many records as we can, which I've been doing.
Correct.
And I send it to you, and I say, Kevin, what do you think? And from most of the time, based on that information and things that you have in your files, you can say, yeah, this works, or yeah, maybe, or gee, this is going to be a tough one.
Yeah, actually, I love that you do that pre-work for me. It helps, because I can look at that in moments and have an idea of what we're into. When we start, you have to go to the Board of Health, you have to pull the records, maybe the Registry of Deeds. It takes some groundwork.
No, I do. I spend a lot of time before I send that to you. Yeah.
But it's valuable before you start spending the money.
Right. So at that point, we can get a good idea. And again, we never know until we dig in the ground, right? Especially if the system's never been upgraded, right? You never know what you're going to find.
Right. So I would suggest also maybe looking at the abutting lots.
Understand. Yeah. Because Title V has been enacted for so long, most of the properties around there, or some of the properties, have been upgraded. And you can get a good idea of the soil conditions and what you're going to find.
Absolutely.
That being said, I've dug on one side of the lot, and it's been perfect.
Yep.
And I've dug on the other side of the lot, and it's been solid clay.
I have as well. So that's why you're required to dig in the area of the system design.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. So I think that was very good. I learned a lot. I appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me.
Anybody has any questions, definitely reach out to BuildX or reach out directly to Grady Consulting. I know they'll do a great job for you. I can personally vouch for them. And that wraps up our first episode here at the Just Build Baby Studio.
Love it. Congratulations, bud.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yep.